Hey, hello people. My name is Rishi and I am an engineer in the Hasura DDN team. Today, my demo will be about building a supergraph with Hasura DDN. A supergraph, as you might know, is a GraphQL API that federates data and API over different data domains, which we call subgraphs. Right? So I'm trying to build an e-commerce application, and one of my subgraphs is the app database. I'll quickly show you what that is. So I have this Postgres database and it has these tables. This is my e-commerce data model. And I want to expose read APIs over this database. And that's going to be my subgraph, right? As my e-commerce application evolves, I might need more subgraphs, like say billing and invoicing could be one. A data warehouse or a data lake could be another, right? So let's get started quickly. I'll go to docs and I will have to install the new Hasura CLI, which we call Hasura 3, the Hasura VS Code extension, because most of the development we'll do in VS Code, and a Postgres database, which I already have. I have these installed, so I won't do it. But if you want to try it out, please install these assets, right? So I'm going to start with Hasura 3 login. Hasura Cloud. I'll log in with Hasura Cloud Personal Access Token. Then I'll create a project, Hasura 3 init. I'll put it in the e-commerce directory locally, right? We create a new project. So a new Hasura DDN project called Select Whale 2376 have been created. Let's in the e-commerce directory. The assets are put in the e-commerce directory. We'll author the metadata there and then apply to the DDN project, right? So let's open this in VS Code. So a bunch of things have been created. Let's go to hasura.yaml. This is the entry point to the Hasura project. It has the project name, Hasura DDN project name, and build profile, right? So what is a build profile? A build profile is a file that contains the spec of how to build the metadata in this folder, right? So if you see, it has supergraph resources and subgraph resources. Supergraph resources contains resources that are common to the entire supergraph, while subgraph resources are independent resources for each subgraph. So a subgraph called default was automatically created, and this is what I'm going to work in right now, right? Going to supergraph resources, there's an auth config here. There's firstly a compatibility config, which is the version of this metadata structure. And then there's auth config, which contains the auth configuration of your supergraph, right? There is a sample webhook, which is managed by Hasura DDN. This has been put in here so that you can play around and get started with your supergraph, but eventually you'd like to integrate it with your own auth provider, right? And now in subgraphs, in default, I have commands, data connectors, and models. Naturally, it's empty because we haven't done anything. So let's add a data connector now, right? I'm going to call it app.html. HTML is Hasura metadata language. It is a language that we author metadata in, and the VS Code extension, which is also identifying this as a Hasura HTML file, will help us author this metadata in an awesome way, right? So let's get started. I hit control space here. There are a bunch of objects that I can add, but I'm going to add Hasura Hub Data Connector. Hasura Hub Data Connector is a data connector managed and maintained by Hasura. So you can just give your database connection parameters to Hasura Hub Data Connector and just instantly bring in that database in your supergraph, right? So I'll call this app. Connector ID is Postgres because it is a Postgres database. Region configuration, I'll add GCP US West 2 because my database is located in US West 4. So it's the closest region, right? Mode is read only because I only want to expose read APIs, version 1, and connection URI. Ideally, if you are ideally in production, in serious applications, you'd like to enter database URL from a secret value because database URL is sensitive. But for the sake of this demo, I'll just use it in plain text directly. It's not recommended. Just letting you know. So now I have brought in the partial configuration of my Hasura Hub Data Connector, and then I will run a VS Code command by hitting Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P, and I'll just say refresh data connector. I choose my database and you see it's refreshing the data connector. It introspects the underlying database and brings in the metadata in the Hasura metadata. So if you see, new metadata has been brought in. there are tables, cart items, there are columns, table cards, the columns, the type of the columns, and things like that, right? So I'll fold this, and now I'll start bringing in tables of this database into my metadata as models, which will be exposed in my GraphQL API, right? So I'll go to the models directory and create a new file called products.html, right? And here I'll run a command, again, Control Shift P or Command Shift P, and I'll just say track collection from data connector. You see all the tables in my database are suggested. I'm only going to bring in products, and you see products, the table products has been brought in as a model in my metadata, and then this model has type called products, which also got auto-defined, and this product has fields which map onto the columns of the underlying project table, which is category ID, country of origin, and then whatever scalar types were required, they were also brought in and defined here. So it is completely declarative, right? If I want, I can change the name of the scalar, and that's the name of the scalar that will get reflected in my GraphQL API, right? So similarly, I'll bring in the orders table as an orders model. Again, I hit Control Shift P and track collection orders, and again the model orders has been brought in. There are a couple more objects like model permissions, type permissions. We'll come to that in a bit. Okay. Now that I've done this, I'll go to my terminal and run Hasura 3 build. So this will create a build. Firstly, what is a build, right? A build is an immutable compilation of your metadata. You can look at the build, you can query it, like you can preview what the metadata will compile to, and you can make GraphQL APIs to the build independently, right? You can create any number of builds, and finally, when a build is good to go, you can apply it to the to your project URL, and that URL can be queried by your clients and different APIs, right? So let's quickly go to the console and explore this build that we just created. You see, there is orders and products models that we just exposed, and we can now start querying them. ID, status, create that, and I can run this query. It will give me all orders. There are many, so now I'll also add a limit, say 4, and I can add filters, say where status equals complete, right? And I make this query, and yes, here we go. Right. Similarly, I can also add the products node, and yeah, can also query products, right? So can go to the explorer and visualize our subgraph. Currently, there is only one data connector called app and only 2 models which are not connected through relationships, right? So I will go and now add relationships, right? So firstly, I go to the orders.html and say track suggested relationship. So I'll create a relationship. It is suggesting a relationship from orders to products based on the product ID foreign key. I'll track that. Go down, a relationship has been added. Source is orders, target is products. It's an object relationship, and the mapping of columns is also defined, right? Similarly, I'll add a relationship from product to orders, a reverse relationship with that foreign key, and that also got added from products to orders. Relationship type is array, and this mapping, right? I'll also bring in a users model. I'll hit Control Shift P, track collection, users, and yeah, user model has been brought in. I'll also track suggested relationship from users to orders. Right? From orders to users, not really, I don't want to bring it right now. So I'll keep it that way. And now I'll go and create another build. Right, another build got created. The previous build is there as is, you can still query it. Right, but this is another separate independent build that got created. Let's try to query it. Right, so if you see, users has also been brought in, and now I can make queries. So say something like I want to query orders along with the product that was ordered, right? So your ID and name has been product ID and product name is also coming in with the orders table. So we can query over relationships, right? We can also make like fancy queries like users ID name, then orders. We are querying all products that users ordered, right? So ID, image, name, and here we go. So Sean had queried sticker sheet, Rob had queried Hasura's in the cloud T, and so on, right? If we go and visualize this, I go to my subgraph. There's one subgraph default, which has a data connector app, and this has three models interrelated in this way, right? One-way relationship from users to orders, two-way relationships between orders and products, and things like that, right? So going back to graphical, I make this query, and I get all the users, all right? Now, this is a pretty good query. This is the kind of query. Just give me a second. Yeah, sorry. So let's go and so this is a query which gives users and the products they ordered. But there's a problem with this query that this query returns data for all users, and this is not something I'd like in my application, right? In my application, I'd like to make a query where users can only see their own data and their own orders, but you'd like users to see all the products. So Hasura has permissions which can help us achieve exactly this. So let's go and configure the permissions, right? So firstly, on the users model, right? If I look for model permissions, uh, you see there is a permission for role admin, which has no filters. So it's giving, we've been making queries as admin, that's the default role. You can change the default role, this thing. But currently, we've been making queries as admin, but now we will also add permissions for role user. And for filter, we'll say field comparison, field ID equals value from session variable x Hasura user ID. Right. What this will do is whenever a query comes to Hasura and Hasura resolves this query from the session. So how it does is it queries this webhook since we have configured a webhook. Hasura would get the session of that query, that could be a token or cookie or anything, and resolve that session into session variables, which could be Hasura role, Hasura user ID, Hasura email, and you could have any number of session variables, right? So what Hasura would do now is Hasura would look at the Hasura user ID and only allow data which has ID equal to Hasura user ID in the users table, right? In the users model. Similarly, there is type permission, which allows us to restrict what all fields users the roles can query, right? So for admin, all fields are allowed, but for role user, I only want to allow ID, email, and creative. And that's what I'm going to do, right? And similarly for orders, I want to have model permission, set that for role user, field comparison, where field user ID equals value from session variable x Hasura user ID, right? And in type permissions, let's see, for role user, I want created at, sure, delivery date, sure, ID, okay, is reviewed is something I don't want, right? And finally, for products, I don't want to have any restrictions, so I'll just replicate the permissions for role admin and role user. Right? And yeah, we have set permissions now. Let's quickly create a build. Hasura build create. Hasura 3 build create. Right? And now if I go to the build, By the way, you can also view your previous builds here and query them. They are always there, right? So now if I go here and I'll make that query again, all users are returned because I'm still making the query as admin. Now I'll try to emulate this query as role user. Let me pick up the X user ID of Sean, and let me try X Hasura role is user, and X Hasura user ID is this user ID, right? And now instantly it's showing me errors that this name field doesn't exist on users type because we hadn't allowed the name field in the type permissions, right? Same for is reviewed, right? So I'll remove this and now I'll make the query and I'll only see query data for Sean, right? Similarly, if I query the orders table, ID, say status, and I'll only see orders that Sean had made. So we have added an authorization layer on our API, and we are pretty much good to go, right? If I just replace this with my auth provider, this API is quite ready to be exposed to my users, right? So if I go visualize, it's still the same because we didn't add any new items, but you can see some permissions here, right? There are permission on products, everything is allowed. On orders, the user role has partial permissions, same for users, right? So now similarly, I like this API. Now I'll bring in rest of my models in, right? I'll say other models dot example. Ideally, you'd like to have a model's metadata in its own separate file, like we did for orders, products, and users. But just for the sake of this demo, I'm putting in everything here. So I'll just say track all collections from this app in this file, and I'll go create a build, and let's go check it out. So now again, we added more models, but they're not showing up here because the query is being emulated as role user, and we have not added permission for those new models for role user. So they are not exposed, right? But now if I remove this, now the query is being made as admin and all the models are exposed. So we can query all these models as admin. And if we want to expose them to users, we can just add permissions like we added for users and orders models, right? If I go and before I go and visualize that, I will also apply a build to, like now that I have exposed things, I have added authorization to some models. I'll apply this build to my project URL. So far, we've been querying the build URL. This has the build version, the project name -build version. But now if I go to the project URL, which is project name.btn.hasura.app, I can see the same API because I had just applied it. If I go to access, if I make query as access role user, the permissions are still valid. So the build, the last build got applied to the project URL. And yeah, this can be exposed to my front-end application because this URL will always be constant, right? We'll quickly try to visualize this. Yeah, now you see we have a beautiful visualization of my subgraph. I'll go full screen and you can visualize it however you want. I'll set it to 3D first diagram, and yeah, and I can visualize it. I can create architectural diagrams. I can use this in my presentations and things like that. So yeah, we have created a subgraph. Let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, thank you so much.